The Odell Beckham Jr. Sweepstakes start today. Derate us, an organization in turmoil. And the NCAA, is that organization even relevant anymore? All that and much more coming up on Fourth and Justus. Welcome to another edition of Fourth and Justus, the dopest show around where we look at the intersection of race, sports, and politics. My name is Leonard Moore, and I have my co-host, Kevin A.D. Anderson, the pride of San Francisco, California. A.D., how we doing this morning?
West Coast.
That's right. And the pride of Wake Forest University, although they took an L this past week, Luke Fetlam. Luke, how we doing today?
What's up, Doc? I knew you had to bring out Wake Forest to kick things off. Come on, man.
I took that L. And of course, we always have to give our weekly disclaimer because my two co-hosts are two very important brothers.
The views of Kevin B. Anderson do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense, the United States Air Force, or the United States government, his family, or his children. The views
I think
of
Luke got a disclaimer too.
Thank you. The views of Luke Fedlam, not to be confused with Federal Fedlam, do not necessarily reflect the views of Porter, Wright, Morris, and Arthur, or his family either. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. And the University of Texas told y'all a long time ago that Negro don't speak for us. So I'm good on my disclaimer. But anyway, brothers, good to see everybody. We want to start off with the NCAA, the headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana. They are rewriting their constitution. And it appears, Kevin, that they want to give the Power 5 schools more autonomy. What is the rationale for the NCAA, rewriting its constitution? And is this basically a last-ditch effort for them to stay relevant?
Well, Doc, first of all, when I started to read the document, it was repetitive in what's the Constitution now. It talks about taking care of student athletes, not paying them commercially, but paying them for educational purposes and the NLI. The thing is that I believe the whole thing is a sellout. You got Division I, you got Division II and Division III that in order for the Division I to get their votes, they're settling for this because they're not going to impact the financial wherewithal and support that the NCAA gives them. A lot of this that has been written and published in the last couple of days, it's what we're supposed to be doing anyway. So, right. Why there's no change now. What has to happen, in my estimation, is that you have to look at the organization as a whole and that you have to bring the right people in to discuss and bring new policies. And, not to disparage anybody, but I look at some of the people that are involved, and I've been around probably too long. Who are they? Where do they come from? Not that they can't do the work, but, the power brokers aren't at the table, in my estimation. And then the other thing is that when they first came out with the committee, I believe there were only two people of color. One was Hispanic, one was African American, and then the membership spoke up, and then they have 4 or 5 other minorities on this committee. So, again, it's something that they've just failed at bringing something to the table that has relevance.
Okay. Luke, what's your take? Is this the NCAA's last-ditch effort to stay relevant, or you think this is just they're fighting a losing battle, that the Power 5 want to break off and do their own thing? And is this just, like I said, a last-ditch effort?
It's survival mode. The bottom line is they're doing everything they can to survive. I don't know what we're really talking about here in the sense that, there's there's so much more that could be done in terms of reimagining the NCAA. And I'll put that term in air quotes, right? Because, I mean, if we think about it, it's an association, right? It's an association of its member institutions. So what they're talking about now is, hey, D2, D3, you're going to be able to do your thing. We'll give you the money. We'll break you off,
Right.
Do you. D1, we want that flexibility to be able to go ahead and maybe break away and think about things anew. And if we talk about football, basketball in particular, we look at the Power Five. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to see something where we're not going to experience the NCAA as we have for the past, 70 plus 80 years, right, in the same form or fashion 5 years from now. And the question is, are they doing enough to stay relevant and to change things up, or are they just kind of, barely, making, issues, dealt with at the fringes?
Kevin, will
Luke,
this
they're
help the
kicking a
NCAA
lot
stay
back
relevant?
They're kicking a lot back to the conferences. So my first question is, if you give the conferences more responsibility and autonomy, then you have to look at the NCAA as a whole. And so now the millions of dollars those folks are making up there, are they going to take a pay cut? Are they going to reduce the staff? And then who's going to monitor the conferences? Because we all know this to be true. There's people that are going to do right and there's people that are going to do wrong. And how do you monitor that? Because a conference has to project penalties. But again, conferences make money off how good their teams are. So there's a conflict there. So how do you resolve that? There's a lot of issues. But Luke, I want to go back to what you said. You know what really bothers me about the NCAA? You're absolutely right. It's a membership organization, but yet and still you go to the members and they talk about like the NCAA is a separate entity and that they have all the power because one member, one vote. And that, if you don't like something, you bring it up and, you caucus it and you fight for it. And, the whole thing is just, I don't know how you fix it.
Well, let me throw this out there, Luke. Even with the NCAA's issues, I still would prefer the Power Five stay within the NCAA because there are at least some guardrails. Now, the NCAA has issues, but there are at least some guardrails and some rules and regulations. I mean, could you imagine if the SEC was able to do their own thing? You wouldn't even have brothers going to class. Luke, what's your take? They wouldn't go to class.
Hey, listen, I mean, you could be right, but at the same time, even if the Power Five breaks away, there's going to still have to be guardrails. It's not going to be like, oh, hey, just do whatever you want to do and we'll figure it out. We're just going to care about playing our sports. I mean, there'll still be guardrails. They'll put some things into play. It's just going to be something different, right? So whereas we have the NCAA, right? And just like Kevin said, it's so easy for institutions and others to just blame this organization, even though they're members of that organization, giving that organization its power. So whatever, call it the Power Five Association of America. I mean, whatever it is, right? Like they'll come up with something, they'll come up with rules. Now, is this going to happen? I don't know. But what you always have to do is follow the money. And that's one thing that we do know, where the money is being made, and that's where ultimately the rules are going to get made.
Okay. Switching gears, speaking of following the money, the University of Washington head football coach Jimmy Lake, a brother, African-American, first-year coaching the team. He got suspended for one game he had an altercation with a player. I think he was trying to break up a fight, and it appears as if he had his play card or something like that, and he hit the kid in the head with the play card, and I think grabbed him. Kevin, what is your take on Jimmy Lake and the one-game suspension he received from the University of Washington?
So in watching the video, I really didn't have a problem with how he broke up the fight and then the card. But then when the young man turned, he pushed him. Now, that's going too far. And, particularly, he should have a better understanding about how we approach our young people. And, a good leader doesn't have to do that. And one game suspension, I think that's pretty lenient, and that there has to be, I believe, a further discussion if there isn't already, and that he has to know that, that behavior is not going to be tolerated. And that, let me ask you this, had that been a white coach, what do you think would have happened?
I was going to ask Luke that. Luke?
I like how you just tossed that over to me, Doc. Listen, I'll tell you, if it was a white coach, man, then there's so many other factors that come into play. If it's a white coach and a black player, hey, on the one hand, maybe nothing is done. And on the other hand, it could be a big issue. But I think here's the bottom line, right? The fact is, that ultimately when that player turned his back and walked away, and that coach in the heat of that moment, right, pushed him from behind, that's too far, right? It's too far, and we have to teach, right? So it's interesting how we take on these arguments when they benefit us in different ways, right? That on the one hand, it's like, college student athletes, they're playing for the love of the game, and how pure our college sports are and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and if we're teaching that, then we need to make sure that our coaches, right, are teaching that. Exhibit leadership, in what you're supposed to do in the heat of the moment, right? Have the conversation, right? You can be upset if your player's getting involved in a scrum and a scuffle or whatever, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you push them from behind. I mean, what example is that setting for all the other teammates? And on top of that, ultimately, the suspension is one piece, and we could argue that the suspension potentially should have been more. But the question is he going to lose the locker room and therefore lose the team because of the way that he acted? And ultimately, where does that leave him? Because, I mean, if you look at his history, there have been some other issues over this past year, at Washington as well. So we'll see what the future holds for him.
Yesterday and today, the Twitter sphere is blowing up with a conversation secretly recorded on the University of Texas Longhorn football bus leaving Iowa State Stadium going to the airport. They got blown out 30-7. And somebody recorded the defensive line coach, Bo Davis, basically chewing the team out on the bus, basically called them a bunch of MFs, told the MFs they can get in the transfer portal. And the funny thing is some people seem to like that kind of talk, like the kids deserve it. But Luke, I'm with you. I mean, these are kids. They are not getting paid. And so, Kevin, why do we still tolerate this kind of behavior on behalf of coaches? Because if I was a professor pushing a kid, Luke, or cussing a kid out, calling the kid an MF, telling the MFs to drop the class, I would lose my job. So, Kevin, why are we still in this Neanderthal type behavior?
Well, we shouldn't be. And if I may share one of my stories, when I was at West Point, I had a basketball coach get a cadet, pick him up, and slam him up against the wall. I went in to talk to the superintendent and told him this. And so I said, we have to dismiss him. And the superintendent was hesitant and say, well, do you think we really need to do that? And I said, sir, if it had been an officer and he had done that to an enlisted man, what would happen? He'd be out of the Army. So no difference. But here's the other thing, and we've talked about this before. These young people are different, and you have to communicate with them differently. And if you can't do that, then you don't belong in the business, because they're not going to do what you ask them to do if they don't feel they can't trust you and that you don't have any respect for them. And anybody, I mean, I'd be offended if someone got on the bus and started calling me a motherfucker. Right. And I mean, it's just unacceptable. And, we can't tolerate that kind of behavior. And if we do, then, the ramifications are what happens. And so, I mean, you're going to lose recruits. I mean, if I'm a parent and I hear that or see that, definitely I'm not sending my kid to Texas. Right. So, but it's unacceptable. And more things have to happen to penalize that kind of behavior.
Luke, one of the moms here, of a kid on the team, she said that she went and looked at her son's birth certificate after she saw the video, and she said MF is nowhere on his birth certificate. So, Luke, how do you respond to people saying, well, I was coached this way, these kids are soft, you don't want to hear what my coach told me 30 years ago? How do you respond to people who want to have this nostalgic past for how their coaches talk to them?
Stop it. Right? Stop it. Times are different. We gotta catch up with the times. What do we teach our young people all the time? We teach them, be careful what you put on social media. We talk about, be careful what you say to fans and other people, right? We teach them about how to, carry themselves appropriately. Well, let's reflect that. We should expect that in our leadership. Now, can you be upset, right? If your team just took a loss and they're all, carefree and cracking up and kikiing on the bus on the way back, would you be upset as a coach? Absolutely. But can you allow yourself and your emotions to take over? What do we teach our young people? We teach them to keep their emotions in check. You can be upset. You can be angry even. But you got to be able to communicate, as Kevin said, in a way that's effective and yet at the same time doesn't belittle people, doesn't degrade people. We can do better than that.
Somebody said the coach wasn't mad that they lost, but the coach is mad because he knows in about a month he's going to have to go get another job somewhere. All right, moving on. The Odell Beckham Jr. Sweepstakes start today. As a Cleveland Browns fan, there was this big debate in Cleveland whether, the Browns basically chose Baker over OBJ. OBJ, they work out a deal. He gets released last week, and the Cleveland Browns won big on Sunday in Cincinnati. So the question is, Kevin, if you were a general manager or head coach, do you take a chance on Beckham?
Definitely, particularly when we have little less than half the season yet to be played, because he has something to prove. I mean, he's a very talented player. And so I know that I'm going to get 6 to 8 good games from him. And, particularly if I was a playoff team or a potential playoff team, I definitely would, because he'll fit in the chemistry short term. Now, long term, I think that we've seen that with the Giants and the Browns, sometimes I guess his act could wear thin with some people. But on the short term, if I needed a wide receiver and I wanted to win, I definitely take a chance. And I think we're going to see that, and it's probably going to be a bidding war.
But Luke, would you bring that kind of personality into the locker room?
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. As long as we don't bring his dad into the locker room, right, and we just focus on, his talent and abilities and everything, I agree. He's got something to prove, right? So ultimately, if you're a win now team, right, and they've talked about, Saints, Packers, Chiefs are kind of some of the options out there, Seahawks, that kind of thing. Like, if you're a win now team and that you really need that extra boost to potentially make it to the playoffs, yeah, for sure. Does that mean that you're setting up a long-term contract with him? No, not necessarily, right? Let's play it by ear. Let's win now.
Is he okay with getting 4 or 5 targets a game? He's not going to get 15, 16 targets a game like Devontae Adams. And I think that was the issue in Cleveland. They felt that Baker Mayfield felt pressure to get him the ball all the time, when the data showed that Baker and the Browns played better when he wasn't on the field. So it'll be interesting. I think it's a risk, Luke. I think it's a risk to bring him in the locker room.
But let's be honest, though. I know. Listen, come on. I don't know if you should have led this segment, because you're a Browns fan, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the assumption that Baker's a dynamic quarterback. Come on, if we're talking about some of these other quarterbacks, Mahomes, Russell Wilson, and others, like, if you get 5 or 6 targets, but you're going those 5 or 6 targets, you're getting 100+ yards a game. Yeah. Would you be happy with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I just think could really use him as the Rams. The Rams could really use them. I mean, with Sam and they're right in the thick of things. So, I mean, again, I would take the rental. I don't know if I would buy, but I would take the rental.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit, the Oakland Raiders, the silver and black, the black hole, as they say, an organization in turmoil. A few days after Henry Ruggs got dismissed for the tragic DUI, vehicular homicide, Damon Arnett, a cornerback from The Ohio State University, me and Luke's alma mater, the brother gets cut from the team and released, Luke, because he is on social media, it seemed like with several assault rifles in his hand, telling somebody, yeah, come on and come by my house. So is the organization in turmoil, Luke? And let me say this. They brought Gruden in. They got rid of Reggie McKenzie, the brother, who was a phenomenal GM. He hires Mike Mayock, a basically TV draft analyst. And one of the first things Gruden does is he gets rid of Khalil Mack, the alpha male in the locker room. So where do the Raiders go from here? And can a lot of this be laid at the feet of John Gruden?
I think turmoil is a big word. Are they in turmoil? I don't know. Is this something that they can overcome? For sure, right? I mean, ultimately, let's be honest of what they've done, right? They took a stand. So they took a stand against Arnett, saying, this is not who we are. This is not the culture that we're creating. We don't want to be known by this. You have a professional responsibility. Therefore, we're going to release you. Now, we could look at the totality of just over the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, what's occurred with their organization. But at the same time, you've got to hope and believe. And again, I think that you bring up some great points about what's happened in terms of front office personnel, turnover, firings and that kind of thing. But if we look at where they're at right now, they're at a place where, what are they, 5-3, 5-4? They're right in the thick of things within their conference, but they've also taken a stand. Now, they let Gruden resign as opposed to be fired, which we talked about that weeks ago. I don't want to get back into it, right? They almost had no choice with Ruggs, and they made a proactive choice with Arnett. So I don't know that they're in turmoil, but they definitely have been dealt a pretty heavy blow over these past few weeks. Kevin,
what needs to happen in Oakland from a leadership standpoint?
Vegas.
The whole organization.
I mean, Vegas. Man, they Oakland to me. I'm sorry, man. That's Oakland to me. I'm sorry.
Oaktown, you're right. And that's what we need to go back to. The whole organization was built with outlaws and bad boys. They make the Pistons look like kindergartens compared to what happened and what they used to do. I mean, Al Davis was an outlaw. Al was a rebel without a cause, and he turned that into something positive that built a winning organization. So this is not new to them. What's new to them is that in the past, I don't know if they would have let people go because of the video. I don't know if he would have let Gruden go. He might have, talked about it. But Al Davis was Al Davis, and this whole thing was built on, crisis. They love crisis. They won through crisis. And so, I think the son has changed now, and he's got more corporate and more, backing the shield, where I don't know if Daddy would have done this.
Right. No, Al Davis was one of the, he was an owner with a personality. This week, ESPN released a story about the Phoenix Suns owner, Robert Sarver. And Sarver is making the headlines for all the wrong reasons. It was an expose on ESPN.com. They interviewed 70 former staff members, and they seemed like they all had one common theme when they talked about the owner, misogynistic and racist. Now, this puts James Jones in a tough spot, who's general manager, and the head coach, and Chris Paul. You know what I mean? Phoenix got kind of popular last year. Luke, how would you, if you were the commissioner of the NBA, I was about to say David Stern, that's how old I am. But if you were the commissioner of the NBA, how do you handle this situation in Phoenix? Somebody said if you got some money and you want to buy an NFL team, get your coin ready, because this organization will go up for sale as soon as the NBA investigates. Luke, what should Phoenix do at this point? And what should the NBA do in many ways with this owner?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Adam Silver, you got to go through the process. You got to go through your investigation. Obviously, we've got, ESPN did a pretty in-depth, reporting on this, a lot of interviews and all that. Like you said, 70 past and current employees. But it's got to be the NBA, and they got to go through their investigation. If they go through their investigation and they find that some of these things that we're hearing about and reading about are true, they got to get him out. They got to get him out. We had the same conversation. What was it, back in 2014 or so with the Clippers former owner, right? I mean, you've got to think about this, right? We know what the NBA is about, and the NBA has been very clear about we are. Of all the pro sports leagues, they're like for the people, right? In that sense, right? That's kind of their branding. And so to allow for this to continue on, no, the organization is gonna have to be sold. And I'll tell you this, because a lot of times people try to say, oh, that's just the coach, or oh, that's just the owner. No, when people in positions of power, especially when white men in positions of power allow for this type of environment to exist, it creates a toxic environment, because then you have another set of leaders that have to determine, am I going to go against the owner, right, in the execution of our day-to-day operations, right, or am I going to get in line? And that's what creates an overall toxic work environment. Yeah. So you can't just say, oh, that's just the owner. So and just say, okay, well, you got to ultimately, if these things come back to be true, you got to get rid of the owner, sell the team, and start fresh.
So Kevin, let's talk about Monty Williams for a minute, Kevin. He made a statement, and I like the statement he made. He just said that what has been reported in the expose is not the Robert Sarver that I know. So what I like about Monty Williams didn't go all in and say, no, this stuff ain't true. He basically said, that's not the Sarver that I know. So what does it do for Monty Williams and Chris Paul and James Jones? I would say sort of the three most visible figures in the Suns organization who are all African-American. What kind of position does this put them in?
Puts them in a very difficult position, because if you look at Monty and you look at Chris Paul, what they stand for and what they've gone public before, and where, they've drawn a line on different things that have happened. You look at what happened when they were back in the bubble, and, the protest, and what happened in Wisconsin and refusing to play and everything else. So now you have to ask the question, where does this go from here? Now, I think what would happen in the league office if Monty Williams or Chris Paul or anybody came back and said, I can't play for this gentleman and I'm not going to, then I'm going to go back to what Luke said. They're going to pressure him and say, well, you cannot keep this franchise. Yeah. But let's be honest with each other. Mm-hmm. These folks have crazy money, and they feel that they could do, this is a toy to them. This isn't something that they created their wealth from. So now this is a toy. And I probably shouldn't say this, but a lot of these guys who own these teams now never played, never been in the locker room, probably used to steal their lunch money and they were
Right.
trading baseball cards. And so now they've got this power and authority over all these folks. And so now they feel like they could do whatever they want to do.
I mean,
And
it
so,
seemed like the dude, Kevin, it seemed like this guy was running a frat house operation with his language. I mean, they said he pulled a dude's pants down in front of like 60 people. Who does this kind of stuff?
Well, but that's a great analogy, because what it is, it becomes their play toy. A grown-up play toy. When we're younger, we have cheaper toys. And, if you have money, you get bigger and better toys. And this is a play toy. So they feel they could come in there, do what they want, have fun, bring their boys in, get drunk, bring women. I mean, we're looking at Washington now, where they're doing the investigation, and it's behind the women and the cheerleaders and everything else. So, we just get older, but it doesn't change.
Yeah, so Kevin, you weren't surprised. What is surprising is the college football playoff rankings came out on Monday. Number 1, the Georgia Bulldogs. Number 2, they shouldn't be there, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Number 3, they should be there, the Oregon Ducks, and me and Luke's Ohio State Buckeyes, number 4. What is interesting about this, Luke, is that on one level, it seems like the college football playoff is prioritizing head-to-head matchup with having Oregon ahead of Ohio State. But then if you go and look further down, Michigan State beat Michigan, but Michigan is ranked ahead of them. And how does that work, Lod? That doesn't make sense to me, Luke. What is your take on that?
Well, come on, man. You got a whole committee, right, that gets into a room and they have these conversations. They're going to vote on whatever factors are important to them that they think make sense. But I just want the record to reflect that we talked about this last week, right? We had this conversation, Doc, and and you were talking about Ohio State and the head-to-head with Oregon and all that. And I'm telling you, it goes back to overall kind of, there's so many different factors that come into play here. But it is interesting, and I think we're going to see a lot more.
It shouldn't. You shouldn't leave this up to a bunch of nerds sitting in front of a computer. You got to watch football. You tell me who the better team. And Oregon came into Ohio Stadium and pretty much blew them out. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Luke.
No, listen, you're right. And I will agree, because 6 and 7 doesn't make sense, right? If you're going to have Michigan and then Michigan State, that just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, is Alabama ranked too high?
No.
Barely beat a weak LSU team.
I think they have it right. If you look at it right now, and we talked about it, and you talked about it last week, that Oregon beat Ohio State. So no doubt about it. Right now, whoever Georgia has played, they have been the best team in the country. Their defense probably has 8 to 9 first, second, third round draft choices. So until they stumble, they're number 1. Alabama plays in the SEC, and they're Alabama. They might not be as good as they have been before, but I don't see too many teams being able to beat them. So Oregon beats Ohio State. I think that Oregon belongs there, in Ohio State, I think they've, with their strength of schedule and what they've done so far, I think they've got it right. So the question is, and you're absolutely right, and I listened to Gary Barta, who's the chairman of the committee. They looked at how Michigan State lost to Purdue and who Michigan's played. But let's go back to it. I mean, if I'm playing somebody and I beat you and we still have the same record, how could you jump in front of me? But you know what? There's somebody in the room, because there's a couple football people in the room. They're influencing those folks. And so
I know they are.
They're like bamboo. They'll go with every
Luke
way
likes
the
looking at
wind's
them
going.
computer modules and all that kind of stuff, and all that algorithms and all that kind of stuff.
Analytics, baby. It's analytics. Come on.
So let me ask you this.
Back, and I got a short story, but I mean, so Dusty, look how far he's got, and this year he did. And, he got fired because he would not buy into all the analytic things, because you have to measure a man's heart. And you have to understand how they're going to respond to things. And that's why he's been successful. But now we have these people, like you're saying, and if it's on the computer screen, it has to be true and right. And I mean, come on, we're dealing with human nature. And I mean, all this other stuff is BS.
I mean, I look at this nonsense, like if you're watching a college football game, Luke, ESPN will come out third quarter of the game. Oh, this team has a 74% chance to win the game. Where the hell are they getting that stuff from? But I don't want to get to that. But here's the thing. What does this mean for Luke Fickell's Bearcat program at Cincinnati? If they went out, and one of the teams in Ohio, I think Ohio State, it could be upset by Purdue this weekend, by the way. If Cincinnati wins out, can they get in the playoff, Luke?
No.
Not at all.
No, I mean, I hate to say that, right? Like, and I don't want to be flip about it, but it sounds great. But look at their strength of schedule. Look at the teams, and look at the teams. I mean, you only get 4 teams in. If we were talking about an expanded 12-team playoff, absolutely, right? Absolutely. But we're talking about 4 teams, and they just aren't one of the top 4 teams in the country.
Okay. Kevin, quickly, does Cincinnati get in?
No, and they've already justified it because they've said their wins haven't even been, strong and significant. They brought up a Navy and a Tulsa and a Tulane and how they should have blown them out. So, the other thing is, if I'm a coach now, I'm going to put 50 or 60 on you whenever I can, so I remove all doubt.
Okay, hold on a minute. So you're basically saying that Cincinnati has to pass the eye test. If I recall correctly, Ohio State went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and basically that game, it was a one-score game well into the fourth quarter. Right or wrong, Luke?
You're right.
Who has Ohio State beaten?
Listen, at the end of the day, they beat Penn State.
Penn State, who's lost 3 games. Go ahead. And we'll lose to Michigan this week. Go ahead, Luke.
No, listen, what you're saying is right, but tell me you don't think that they deserve to be in the playoff, in the top 4 spot. Do you disagree that do you believe they shouldn't be number 4 in the rankings?
I don't know. I want to see what they do against Michigan State and Michigan. That's what I want to see what they do.
Yeah.
I want to see what they do.
Hey, Doc, but here's the deal. The Big Ten has 6 teams in the top 20, top 25. Yeah. So that's the other thing that they're honing in on is the strength of the conference. And so, if you look at the conference Cincinnati's in, there's no comparison. And so that's part of what they're looking at and how they justify how they come up with this.
We'll see a lot of parity in college football, and I think the gap is shrinking between those Power 5 schools and the Group of 5. Going to men's basketball at the collegiate level, Mike Boynton, head men's coach at Oklahoma State, had a blistering attack on the NCAA, and this brother brought receipts, and he was naming names. This was in the aftermath of Oklahoma State getting a 1-year ban for postseason competition for something that happened in 2016 that involved $300. 2016 involved $300, but yet and still, Will Wade, the coach at LSU, Luke and Kevin, has been caught on tape buying players. He's still coaching, no postseason ban. Kevin, what did you think when Mike Boynton started calling names? Because we know some of those people. Were you surprised at that?
Woo! All I could say is that, my hat's off to him because he's right. So who are we punishing? We're not punishing the adults. We're punishing the kids that had nothing to do with it. When he was at his press conference, he said one of his players came up and asked him what this was all about because he wasn't even in school yet. So now we have to go back and have the conversation about the NCAA and how they do things, and that, we still have those coaches that are on video and audio tapes that admitted and talked about paying players off, and 2 or 3 of them are still coaching. Yes. And the other ones got bought.
What happened to the black assistants, Kevin?
They were wearing orange jumpsuits, and they had the chains they had on wasn't around their neck. Right. And now they can't get another job coaching again. So what are they going to do? Leonard, that's a great question. So now you had these brothers who are making $250,000, $300,000, maybe even more. And now where are they going to find another job that they could make that? They can't. But yet and still, these other coaches, the head coaches, they're making millions of dollars, and we're still waiting. Here's what really bothers and irritates me. To do what the FBI did and to spend the kind of money they did on wiretaps and everything else cost us as taxpayers a lot of money. And for us to get the results that we've seen now, it's ridiculous. So, again, this is an NCAA issue. This is a membership issue. And the membership, because we have one member that we know is upset about that, and that's Oklahoma State, needs to go further into this and make the changes. And so, you know what it's going to take, Leonard? What you just said. Yeah. Coach called people out. And here's the sad part about it is, now where we all grew up, if you got called out, you weren't just going to go hide if you didn't have anything or no argument. Well,
Right.
those names that we all know, how many have you heard say, well, I've got my side of the story, or this ain't right?
Mhm.
Nobody said anything. So
Nothing.
what does that tell you?
Right. That's right. So Luke, Pat Forty is Sports Illustrated writer. He said that he doesn't feel sorry for any of the kids at Oklahoma State because they knew postseason sanctions were a possibility when they signed to go to school there. How do you respond to that?
Stop it. It's awful. I mean, honestly, like how do we keep doing this? Like we just keep blaming kids or saying, well, it's on them. It's on the kids' fault.
Right.
Like this, I get so tired of that argument. And this is exactly why we had the conversation we did at the beginning of this episode, right? Talking about the NCAA and its relevancy. We have these situations where there are things that punish kids. It just doesn't make sense, right? So when we think about this, we're in a situation now where, punishing kids for this situation, right? Postseason ban. You had, their coach, right? We talked about coaching and how do you communicate and all that kind of stuff. We're looking at their coach, right? He's got tears coming down his face, fired up, right? About this because it just doesn't make sense. And that's what the NCAA has got to figure out, how to be a common sense organization. There are stories, pre-NIL, right, where kicker in whatever it was, Central Florida or South Florida, one of the two, I forget, had a YouTube page, right, and had to choose between whether or not he wanted to do that or keep playing the sport, right? Kids that get suspended because they played in a church summer basketball league that wasn't sanctioned or whatever. I mean, we're talking about these things that have a massive impact on the young people, and it really doesn't. To your point, it really doesn't go after those people who actually made the decisions that end up impacting the program overall.
And my thing is, we're the adults. Nobody in the room says, hold on, this is not a good idea.
Right.
And then, Mike Boynton started calling names off. Then he started listing off people on these appeals committees. He said, I don't know who this person is. This person's general counsel at Princeton. And so I don't know, man. We just need adults in the room, people who are going to speak up. Moving on to the topic of white privilege, Scott Frost, Nebraska head football coach, is 15-27. You got that right. 15-27. He still has his job at Nebraska. He restructured his contract a couple days ago, and I guess a part of that restructuring the contract, he fired 4 assistant coaches with 3 weeks left in the season. Kevin, from an AD perspective, why fire coaches with 3 weeks left in the season? What does that do for a program?
It just damages it. I mean, again, we're looking at, and nobody's taking the kids and how they feel and what they need, into the whole process of how are you going to fix this. But what they're telling us and what they're telling their fan base is that somebody had to suffer for them not being successful and for them to have that kind of record. So this is what I think the AD is seeing. The AD is seeing that what happened with Mike Krzyzewski, and that Mike had 3 or 4 bad years, and then Scott's going to pick it up and he's going to go out in a blaze of glory. That's the only thing I could see now, because I believe at any other program, he would be gone as well. But, again, he's a native son. I mean, he's Nebraska through and through. So he's got
remember, he won that national championship in Central Florida.
He sure did. Sure did. In fact, I'm going down there next week to see the trophy.
Luke, what fantasy world are Nebraska fans living in? Do they think they can recapture the days of Turner Gill, from the late 80s and early 90s? We all would get around on TV and watch Oklahoma play Nebraska. So what fantasy world are they living in terms of their ability to compete at a championship level?
I mean, listen, they're a Big Ten school. They've got an opportunity to compete at a championship level. But the fantasy world that they're living in is that by simply firing, all these assistant coaches is going to have a massive impact on the trajectory of the program. Right? I mean, that's kind of the part that just is fantasy to me. Ultimately, leaders lead. Right. I mean, we this is a common theme through a lot of these conversations where we've had situations where leaders aren't leading. Right. And some leaders find ways to then, cast blame on others, right, to protect themselves. To me, that is not leadership. Right. And ultimately, I get it. Everybody wants to have their opportunity to be able to earn compensation, all that. But if you as a leader, can't get those wins, you're 15-27, and you're going to blame it on your assistant coaches. That means you're not able to maximize the output that you're getting from your assistant coaches, and ultimately, you're the one that needs to go.
I just wasn't raised like that, Kevin and Luke, too. If I'm running the operation and the operation is sinking, well, let me throw these 4 people overboard, and give me time. I'm just not wired like that, but I guess that's why I'm not a coach. Shifting gears to women's basketball.
Doc,
Go ahead, Kevin.
That tells you what kind of person he is. But see, here's the thing. I got to give credit to the new AD because he's brand new. I mean, he could have fired him, Scott Frost, in a minute, and, it wouldn't have stuck to him. But, what he's looking at is he's from there. He understands culture, and he thinks he could build a culture. Well, what happened was when they fired those 4 coaches, what does that say about the culture of the team? So you're absolutely right. One other thing I'd like to add, when Nebraska was good, they were getting people from New Jersey, all over the country.
LA.
But now, how many people want to move and live in Lincoln, Nebraska? That's right. Particularly black folk.
Well, what Luke say, hey, give you a chance to play in the Big Ten. That's the only thing going for him now. Switching gears to women's basketball, the Final Four, women's basketball Final Four 2021 was very exciting. It had Arizona, UConn, South Carolina, Stanford. And the preseason top 25 this year looks very, very similar. UConn is 1, South Carolina 2, Stanford is 3, and Maryland is 4. So, Luke, we'll come to you first. With Dawn Staley's new contract, is she under pressure to deliver and get a ring this year?
No, she's already delivered. She's not under pressure because of the contract. She's under pressure because she dominates. She's a winner. That's what she does at every level. So, a lot of times I don't think people necessarily understand the pressure that certain people put on themselves. Now, I don't know Dawn, so I can't speak for the pressure she puts on herself, but you can tell she's committed to winning. So I don't think the contract puts that pressure to win because she's still going to be able to recruit, and they'll do very well this year. I definitely think they'll be a Final Four team.
You don't think there's added pressure there, though, Luke?
I mean, well, from her perspective? I mean, listen, at the end of the day, she's getting paid, and she's getting paid what she's worth, right? I think a lot of times we feel like there's a pressure. We've talked about imposter syndrome before, right? And we've talked about this idea, especially for Black folk, to feel like, I'm just, I'm here. This is something new. Like maybe I got to prove that I'm good enough and all that kind of stuff. No, she has already earned the contract, right, that she has coming to her. So she shouldn't feel the pressure now. Okay, now I got to win to show that I'm worth the money. Right. You're already worth the money. Win because you're a winner and you want to dominate.
That is a great point about imposter syndrome and John Henryism. And the funny thing is, Luke, we don't feel we've ever gotten paid our value. You know what I mean? So it's like, I appreciate that point you made. She's getting paid based upon what she's already done and not what she'll do in the future. Kevin, what's your take? Do you think Dawn is under any kind of pressure to deliver this year?
I think her pressure is different, and her pressure is relieving the pressure off the team because they're loaded. I mean, they're very, very good. And she has a number 1 recruiting class coming in next year. I watched them play North Carolina State yesterday. That was number 5. They didn't play particularly well, but I think at the end of the game, they won by 11. I mean, she's got a great team. I think, and I go with Luke on this. She's proven everything she needs to prove. The only thing that she could do now, I think, in her career is go over to the men's side just to prove that she could coach anybody and win it at any level. But, Doc, we've talked to her. I know Dawn and everything else. I mean, each and every day when she wakes up, she has something to prove to herself and to honor God and to do the best she can. And I think that's the pressure she lives by.
So, Luke, real quick, how many rings does Dawn need to get? How many rings does she need to get over the next 10 years to solidify her, I say, the best women's coach, or if you're going to put Gino on top, right below her? How many rings in your mind? How many she need to get?
Oh, man, that's a tough question because, Gino, he's incredible and has done great things and a lot of wins. I mean, I think, how many does she need to get? I don't know, but I think she's over the next 10 years, we'll see 2 or 3, maybe even 4.
Okay. All right. We will certainly follow the women's basketball season. The Texas NAACP sent out a clarion call to African-American professional athletes, asking them not to sign free agent contracts with any of the professional franchises in the state of Texas in response to the passage of a very restrictive abortion rights bill and a very restrictive voter suppression bill. Kevin, do you think this appeal on behalf of the NAACP will have any will have any impact?
Well, I think it goes deeper than that, Doc, because Ted Cruz was at, I think, Texas A&M the other day, and he was talking about Texas seceding from the United States and becoming its own country. So I guess that's the question we first have to answer. The politics and the people that represent the state of Texas, I mean, it's concerning to me. Your governor, I don't know what he's smoking, and I understand marijuana is not legal in the state of Texas. And Ted Cruz, he's just a clown. And the unfortunate thing is that he's leading this insurrection in our government because it just didn't happen January 6th. It's happening now because the way they look at these bills and the way they are blocking and they're not supporting, I mean, the voter rights bill and everything else. I mean, that's what this is. So we have a much deeper problem than that. Okay, you don't go in Texas. There's other states that have the same problem. So, I mean, this could be, if things gathered momentum and it happened, there's a lot of other states that should be concerned, not only Texas, but, Doc, I know you live there. I mean, I visit you in Austin. I love Austin. My friend down in Houston loves Houston, but those politics, man, I don't know.
I tell people, Abbott is not as bad as he claims. The fear is, here, Luke, here's what explains Greg Abbott, okay? He used to be a moderate, but what happened, we have a crazy lieutenant governor, who is completely bonkers. So Abbott doesn't want to get primaried by Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor. So, so Abbott will say stuff like no masks, individual freedoms, personal liberties. But then at the bottom, it'll say, we believe everybody should get vaccinated and wear a mask as the best way to remain healthy, So, I think Abbott has gone a bit far, but that is sort of the rationale. So, Luke, understand that the NAACP sort of rationale for this was they saw what happened in the state of Mississippi when those college football players said from Mississippi State, Ole Miss, well, we aren't going to play this season unless the Confederate flag emblem is removed from the Mississippi State flag. And Luke, they called a special session and that flag was removed in 3 or 4 days. And so do you think it can have some impact or do you think it's a long shot?
It's a long shot. I think it can have impact. Is it going to have significant impact on the legislation that they've been talking about, the attacks as the NAACP calls it, the attacks on personal, liberties. But here's the thing. One, it has an impact because we're talking about it, right? So we're bringing this up because it when you involve sports, people want to talk about it, right? So that's one kind of, plus on that side. But the challenge here is that you're also running up against, as just as much as sports kind of can drive things, money drives things too. And the fact that there's no state tax in Texas makes Texas a nice destination for a lot of free agents to be able to go, saving on that state tax money. So there's a challenge there. But ultimately, the fact that they even put out this press release brings and highlights the issue that the state is attacking personal liberties and bringing sports into it, brings it to the limelight, right? We know the rich history, and we could spend a whole episode on this, the rich history of sports getting involved in social movement. The NAACP has tapped into that as they have in the past. And so at least it's being addressed and discussed in circles that it might not have been discussed before.
So,
Gotcha.
hey, Doc, I got a question for you, though. You live there, and I know that you like it there. But, if they came and asked you, well, we need you to move to help support this cause, what would you tell them?
If I need to, here's my issue. I think we placed too large of a burden on black athletes. A lot of them are young. They have a short shelf life to make income. And so I don't believe in putting pressure on young people just because they got money. I think the black folk in the state of Texas can do a whole lot of other things. You can boycott establishments. You can ask, the NAACP to not, the NCAA not to have any sporting events in the state of Texas. I think you got to hit them with an economic boycott because just what we saw in 1954, 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott and a lot of the civil rights movement, that was just as much about economics as it was about anything else. And one thing I learned about white folks, they will put their money before their politics. They will not allow their politics to mess up their money. So I think we have to keep that in mind as we continue to watch this issue moving forward. Lastly, now, for our last segment of the day, who put the raisins in the potato salad? And this week's winner is none other.
Keep your bland-ass potato salad to yourself.
Kevin's homeboy from the Bay Area, Aaron Rodgers. When confronted about why he lied about get vaccinated and he kind of misled the American public, as a part of his defense, Kevin and Luke, he invokes the words of MLK. Now, talking about cultural appropriation at the highest level. You know, Kevin, what did you think about when you heard Aaron Rodgers invoke MLK?
So first of all, I have to justify, he's not from the Bay. He went to school there, but he's from way up in Northern California that's extremely red. So I think right then and there kind of explains things. Here's my deeper concern, though. This thing really had to catch fire before the NFL came in and talked about the fines for the team and for him. So the team's just as guilty because they knew the ramifications and they knew the rules that everybody was living, and they had to know he wasn't vaccinated. Because, I mean, just where I work now is that it's simple. You have to show your vaccination card. And that's how you see who's vaccinated. So you can't tell me an organization that makes the kind of money that Green Bay does in the NFL that's dictating these kind of rules, that they didn't do something simple and say, hey, I need to make sure that you're vaccinated. Well, you know, the thing he was trying to save is his endorsements and who he is, because now I don't know if there's going to be some other teams that don't want him because, you know, I mean, that whole thing was, I won't use profanity, but a lie. And he looked up there and you could tell he was lying. So, you know, I mean, I have very little respect for him anyway, the way he's conducted himself with some other manners. So, you know, whatever happens to him should happen to him and more.
He seems like a very, very interesting guy. So Luke, was his invoking of MLK cultural appropriation or cultural appreciation?
It was cultural appropriation, but I want to call it cultural misappropriation because he didn't even get the quote right. He misquoted MLK. So, like, you know, he's trying to, you know, have it always. I don't want to give him that much oxygen on this show because to me, that is, this just drives me just, you know, I get upset over this, right? Because you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, right? And the arrogance that you show, and then to then misquote or try to quote MLK in your defense on this, no, I think what he did is wrong and he needs to be called out for it.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I mean, I think some of the stories Kevin's alluding to, you know, he doesn't talk to his parents anymore. And, you know, in the black community, when somebody stopped talking to their parents, you know, we don't fool with them no more. You know, you're like, man, you holler back at me when you connect back with your parents. So as we come to a close of our latest episode of Fourth and Justus, I'll ask Kevin and Luke to get their final thoughts together. Again, we're here every week. You know, like us, spread the word. You know, do what you got to do to get more people connected to the show, because we do believe this is the dopest show around, where we look at the intersection of race, sports, and politics. And, you know, we don't hold our tongue. We are unapologetically Kevin, Luke, and Leonard, and we like it that way. So, Luke, we'll come to you first for our final thoughts.
Yeah, final thoughts for me, real brief. You know, this past weekend was able to get my kids. I've got a 11-year-old and a 7-year-old, able to get them vaccinated, their first shot. So they're excited about it. We're excited about it. And so in light of that Aaron conversation, you know, I want to show, hey, listen, if you're not vaccinated, go make sure you're getting vaccinated, and young people getting vaccinated now. It's great to see. All
right. Kevin?
So last weekend, I was able to share the company of General Richard Clark, General Darrell Williams, and General Charles Brown. So the two gentlemen, General Clark and General Williams, are the first African Americans that were superintendents of a academy. And then General Brown is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And, you know, it's very unique to have those kind of people and be in that kind of company. And, you know, it made me proud that we have those three brothers representing these organizations, being the first of what they have accomplished. So that was a great honor for me.
Did you fly them home on your private jet?
No, sir.
Wait till you see that jet, Luke. Gonna blow you away, man. Today was our National Signing Day, and my daughter, Lauren Jeanette Moore, you know, she said 3 years ago she wanted to go play volleyball at an HBCU. So today We had a signing day. About 35 Jackson State folks showed up. She'll be going to Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi, majoring in marketing, I believe, and playing volleyball. And we hope Dion is still there. And you know what, folks? I was hard on Dion when he first got hired, but, you know, I am man enough to admit when I have been wrong. So thank you for joining us today, folks, on the latest episode of Fourth and Just Us. We look forward to seeing you next week, the same place. Have an awesome day.